I'm left-handed myself and I actually didn't see any relevance to my own life when I happened to start reading an article by a sports psychologist called Peter Matthews. He spent the first part of the article talking about handedness in music instead of sport, which I have to say almost put me off from reading further. But what I soon became struck by was the sheer volume of both observation and investigation he had done in many different sports, and I felt persuaded that what he had to say would be of real interest.
There are more than 160 known species of chameleons. The main distribution is in Africa and Madagascar, and other tropical regions, although some species are also found in parts of southern Europe and Asia. There are introduced populations in Hawaii and probably in California and Florida too. New species are still discovered quite frequently. Dr. Andrew Marshall, a conservationist from York University, was surveying monkeys in Tanzania, when he stumbled across a twig snake in the Magambria forest which, frightened, coughed up a chameleon and fled. Though a colleague persuaded him not to touch it because of the risk from venom, Marshall suspected it might be a new species.
Before the beginning of the 1900s, the only way to obtain pearls was by collecting very large numbers of pearl oysters from the ocean floor by hand. The oysters, or sometimes mussels, were brought to the surface, opened, and searched. More than a ton of these had to be checked in order to find just 3 or 4 quality pearls. Divers often descended to depths of over 100 feet on just one single breath. Now, of course, this exposed them to hostile creatures and dangerous waves, not to mention drowning. In some areas, divers put grease on their bodies to conserve heat, and they held a large object like a rock to descend so they didn't have to exert effort going down. Today, pearl diving has pretty much been supplanted by cultured pearl. Particles are implanted in the oyster to encourage the formation of pearls farms, and this allows for more predictable production. The divers who still work, do so mainly for the tourist industry.
Radon is a naturally occurring, colorless, odorless, and tasteless radioactive gas derived from the decay of thorium and uranium, which are common elements found in rock and soil. Radon gas becomes entrapped in houses and other buildings by seeping into cracks in foundations or basements or by entering through sump pumps or other drainage systems. Though most people have heard of radon, very few test their homes for the radioactive gas. One study reported that 82% of respondents had heard of radon, but only 15% had tested for radon.
This multi-million selling internet book is still the ultimate handbook for novices and experts alike. It's written in plain English, it covers everything from getting online for the first time to newsfeeds. This fully revised guide covers all the latest sites and crazes. Whether you've never sent an email or you just want to keep up with the latest developments, this is the book for you.
Labour believes that there can be benefits from change, but if we're going to have change, it needs to be on the basis that the government has addressed the cost-benefit issues, and has addressed the legitimate privacy concerns of Australians. So far it's failed to address either. In relation to cost-benefit, it claims there will be saving of the order of $3 billion over 10 years, but it refuses to release the assumption on which that claim is based, so it simply expects Australians to take it on trust. To biomedical researchers all over the world, twins offer a precious opportunity to untangle the influence of genes and environment, of nature and nurture. Because identical twins come from a single egg that splits into two, they share virtually the same genetic code. Any differences between them, one twin having younger-looking skin, for example, must be due to environmental factors such as less time spent in the sun. Political activists and thinkers across a broad array of ideologies, from libertarians to social liberals to the hard left, are intrigued, or even keen. The Cato Institute, an American think tank which spends much of its time calling for a smaller state, published a sympathetic analysis of the policy in 2015. It feels that, though it might prefer a world with no government redistribution, a basic income is the simplest.
The Brazilian educator and influential theorist Paulo Freire has convinced me that scholarship is a dialogical process. According to Freire, the contributions of one scholar have no meaning if they stand alone. The value of any work becomes apparent only when that work dialogues with the work that has gone before. For this reason, we do literature reviews. For this reason, we include in our manuscripts an implications section. The next topic is going to be black holes, and this is a similar situation. 15, 20 years ago black holes were sort of poised precariously on the boundary between theoretical physics and science fiction. A boundary that is more porous than you might believe. But again, in the past 15 years or so this has been converted into a standard topic in observational astronomy. There are dozens, probably hundreds of objects we can point to in the sky and say, yes, those things are black holes. And so now, the current topic of research is doing these things that we are pretty sure are black holes actually behave in the incredibly bizarre science fiction manner that the theoretical physicists have been talking about for the past 30 or 40 years. So, to what extent are these very exotic behaviors actually manifested? The scientific consensus is that the Earth's climate system is unequivocally warming, and that it is extremely likely that this warming is predominantly caused by humans. It is likely that this mainly arises from increased concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, such as from deforestation and the burning of fossil fuels, partially offset by human-caused increases in aerosols. Natural changes had little effect. National and international science academies and scientific societies have assessed current scientific opinion on global warming. Now that story's been scorched, as only part of contingency planning. But it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed, even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother? Considering that the vast amount of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realised. Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation?
To be honest, the biggest problem for most undergraduate students, in terms of academic writing, is not only adapting to a far more structured and formal style, but also learning how to ascertain the difference between important, valid information and unnecessary, or even irrelevant material. In my experience, I would say it takes students their first year, if not longer, to appreciate what is required and to start to implement those requirements in their writing. What they really should be doing, if they are struggling with written assignments, is to seek help from the excellent support services which are available at the university. There have been many studies in America of the opinions and behavior of university lecturers and professors, and of well-known free or public thinkers who are not attached to a university or other institution, which show that those who are recognized as being more successful or productive as scholars in their field, or are at the best universities, are much more likely to have critical opinions. That is to say that they are more likely to hold liberal views, in the American use of that word, than those of their colleagues who are less creative or who have less of a reputation. The better a university is, as measured by the test results of its students or by the prestige of its staff, the more likely it has been that there will be student unrest and a relatively left-of-center faculty.
The editors hold that if identity politics has no preordained political effects, then to a significant degree, the risks and dilemmas of identity politics signal not a failure of identity politics per se but a failure of states to democratize their political processes. They find this to be especially true of liberal democracies, where open political space for an engaged citizenry requires public institutions that possess the capacity/determination to develop procedures and guidelines for addressing claims in ways that are compatible with the rule of law, constitutional principles, and public reason. Language often seems so skillfully drafted that one can hardly imagine it as anything other than the perfected handiwork of a master craftsman. How else could this instrument make so much out of barely 3 dozen measly morsels of sound? In themselves, these configurations of mouth, P, F, B, V, T, D, K, G, SH, A, E and so on, amount to nothing more than a few haphazard spits and splutters, random noises with no meaning, no ability to express, no power to. The principles of integrative nursing advocate that food be considered as a primary intervention for health promotion, risk reduction, and generally improved well-being. Food provides information to the body, signaling basic biological functions and normalizing physiological processes. Healthcare professionals should query patients about their nutritional intake, recognizing that adjustments in the types of foods consumed can often address long-standing symptoms that create distress, including pain, fatigue, anxiety, and gastrointestinal dysfunction. Living in the Antarctic hasn't always been so comfortable. Snow buildups caused enormous problems for 4 previous stations on the same site, which were buried and finally crushed by the weight. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but these buildings became a huge challenge to architects who finally came up with a remarkable solution. The buildings are placed on platforms which can be raised above the changing snow level on legs which are extendable. Teamwork can also lead to inconsistency, a common cause of poor sales. In the case of a smartphone that a certain company launched, one director wanted to target the business market, and another demanded it was aimed at consumers. The company wanted both directors to be involved, so gave the product a consumer-friendly name, but marketed it to companies. The result was that it met the needs of neither group. It would have been better to let one director or the other have his way, not both. Now, industriousness, or hard work. It's easy to mock people who say they work hard. It is difficult to know how to place Montesquieu, if you're the kind of person who likes to categorize. Historian, political philosopher, sociologist, jurist, or, if you think the Persian letters a novel, a novelist, he was all these things. Perhaps, as some have, he could be placed among that almost extinct species, the man of letters, the books that make up the spirit of the laws have had the most influence on later thinkers, and in them, as in his equally great considerations on the causes of the grandeur and decadence of the Romans, he makes his underlying purpose clear. It is to make the random, apparently meaningless variety of events understandable. He wanted to find out what the historical truth was. His starting point then was this almost endless variety of morals, customs, ideas, laws and institutions, and to make some sense out of them. He believed it was not chance that ruled the world, and that, beyond the chaos of accidents, there must be underlying causes that account for the apparent madness of things.